As the sun began to dip low in the summer sky, casting a golden hue over the sprawling fields of Quebec, Emily fastened her seatbelt and adjusted the GPS for the drive from Granby to Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. This trip, though ordinary to most, held extraordinary significance for her. Sitting beside her, hands on the wheel, was Luc, the man who had unexpectedly entered her life 6 months ago. Luc, a French-Canadian with a deep connection to the rolling landscapes of Quebec, had a quiet charm that drew Emily in from the moment they met. Their connection, though instant, had always felt fragile. Life had taken them on different paths, Emily, an artist from the city who yearned for the calm of the countryside, and Luc, a farmer with roots deep in the earth, tied to tradition and family. As they left Granby, Luc glanced over at Emily, his eyes briefly leaving the road. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice as gentle as the wind outside. Emily smiled faintly, her heart heavy with the weight of words unspoken. She was quiet because this journey was more than just a drive, it was a turning point. For months, they had danced around the possibility of a future together, but neither of them had been willing to take the leap. Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu was where Luc's family lived, and he had invited Emily to meet them, an invitation that felt like more than just a casual introduction. It felt like a step into his world, one she wasn't sure she belonged to. "I'm just thinking," she finally replied, turning her gaze out the window. The fields blurred past, a mosaic of green and gold, interrupted by the occasional farmhouse or barn. It was beautiful here, serene in a way that made her heart ache. She wondered if she could ever truly fit into this life. Luc didn't press her, but she could feel his concern. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the car and the rhythmic sound of tires on asphalt filling the space between them. "I've been thinking too," Luc said after a long pause. His tone had shifted, becoming serious. Emily turned toward him, her chest tightening. "I know that this life of mine isn't what you're used to," he continued, his eyes still focused on the road. "But I've been thinking about how much you mean to me, and I can't imagine this place without you in it." Emily felt her breath catch. The sincerity in his voice, the raw vulnerability, it was the kind of confession she hadn't expected. "Not today, not like this. I don't know if I fit here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I love the quiet, the beauty of it all, but I'm scared. What if I'm not enough for this life? For you?" Luc's hand found hers, warm and steady, grounding her. "You are enough, Emily. You are everything I never knew I needed. This life, my family, they're important, but they're not complete without you." The sincerity of his words struck her deeply. She had spent so long thinking she had to choose between her world and his, between her love for him and her love for the freedom of her art. But maybe she didn't have to choose. Maybe, just maybe, she could have both. The road ahead stretched out, winding through the countryside, leading them towards Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. The closer they got, the more Emily's heart began to settle. She wasn't walking into Luc's world as an outsider. She was becoming a part of it. As they approached the town, the sky turning pink and purple with the setting sun, Luc pulled the car over to the side of the road, stopping by a vast field of wildflowers. Without a word, he got out of the car, walking around to her side and opening the door. Confused, Emily stepped out, the cool evening air wrapping around her. Luc took her hand, leading her toward the field. The fragrance of flowers filled the air, sweet and intoxicating, and as they stood there, surrounded by the beauty of nature, he turned to her. "Emily, I know I don't have all the answers. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to share it with you. Here, or wherever we go, I want us to build something together." Her heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him, silhouetted against the fading light. This man, with his quiet strength and open heart, was offering her more than just a place in his world. He was offering her a future. With tears in her eyes, Emily nodded. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice full of love and certainty. In that moment, the road from Granby to Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu became more than just a physical journey. It became the path they would walk together, wherever it might lead. And as they stood in the wildflowers, beneath the twilight sky, their hearts found their home in each other. The scent of wildflowers lingered in the air long after they left the field, driving towards Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in the fading light. Luke's hand never left Emily's, as though holding her was his way of tethering her to this new reality. She squeezed his hand in return, her mind racing with thoughts of the life they might build together. As they neared the town, the first sign of civilization came into view. A modest farmhouse surrounded by vast open fields, the kind of place Luke had grown up in. Emily felt a pang of nervousness. Luke's family was waiting for her. She wasn't just meeting his parents, she was meeting the people who had shaped him, who shared his roots, his values. What if they didn't see her as a part of this world? What if they thought she would take Luke away from the life he loved? "You okay?" Luke asked softly, breaking the silence. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little nervous." He chuckled, squeezing her hand. "You don't need to be. They're going to love you." "You say that now," she teased, though her nerves didn't fully ease. She was about to walk into the heart of Luke's life. A life so different from the one she had known. The town of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu came into full view, a quaint, picturesque place, dotted with charming houses and winding streets. The river Richelieu shimmered in the moonlight as they crossed the bridge into town, its gentle current a reminder of the pace of life here, steady, unhurried, peaceful. Luke took a familiar turn off the main road, guiding them toward his family's home. Emily could feel her pulse quicken as they approached the large farmhouse that had stood for generations. It was a warm, inviting sight, with light spilling from the windows, illuminating the porch where two figures stood waiting. Luke's parents. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and looked at her with a smile that melted her anxiety, if only a little. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," she replied, taking a deep breath. Luke stepped out first, and before Emily could even get out of the car, his mother had already rushed forward, arms wide and eyes bright with joy. Luke's father followed behind with a calmer, but no less welcoming, smile. "Oh, Luke, mon fils, tu es enfin arrivé," his mother exclaimed, pulling him into a tight embrace before turning her attention to Emily, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and warmth. Emily stepped forward hesitantly, feeling every bit like an outsider. But before she could even offer a greeting, Luke's mother enveloped her in a hug that took her by surprise. "And you must be Emily," she said in a thick Quebecois accent, her voice soft and full of affection. "We've heard so much about you." Emily's nerves unraveled a bit. "All good things, I hope," she replied, earning a laugh from Luke's father, who stepped forward to shake her hand. "All good," he confirmed with a wink. "I'm Alan, and this is my wife, Claire. Welcome to our home." Luke stood back, watching with a smile as his parents welcomed her as if they had known her for years. The warmth of their reception settled some of her worries, but it was clear that this was just the beginning. She wasn't simply visiting Luke's family, she was stepping into a future where these people, this place, could become part of her life too. Inside, the farmhouse was exactly as she imagined, cozy, filled with the smell of home-cooked meals and memories that stretched back for generations. Photos lined the walls, capturing moments of family gatherings, harvests, and celebrations. There was a sense of permanence here, a feeling of being rooted in the land, in tradition. Dinner was already laid out on the table, and as they gathered around, conversation flowed easily. Luke's parents asked about Emily's life, her art, her travels, showing genuine interest in who she was beyond just being Luke's girlfriend. The more they spoke, the more Emily realized that Luke's world wasn't as distant from hers as she had imagined. His parents had their own stories of adventure, of chasing dreams before settling back into the life they had always known. After dinner, as they sat on the porch overlooking the vast fields under a blanket of stars, Luke's father brought out a bottle of wine and poured them each a glass. The night was still, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Emily," Alan began, his tone serious but kind, "we're so happy that Luke brought you here. This life, it isn't for everyone, but we can see how much you mean to him. And that means a lot to us." Emily glanced at Luke, who met her gaze with a soft smile. She could feel the weight of Alan's words, but there was no pressure behind them, just a quiet understanding that she was part of something bigger now. A family, a future, a life with Luke. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to be here. With Luke. With all of you." Luke's mother smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Then you're already one of us." As the night deepened and the stars shone brighter, Emily realized that the journey from Granby to Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu had been more than just a drive. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, family, and the promise of a future she hadn't dared to dream of. And as Luke's arm wrapped around her, pulling her close under the vast night sky, Emily felt, for the first time, that she had truly found her place. The next morning, Emily awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside the window and the soft creaking of the old farmhouse as it stirred with life. The sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. For a moment, she lay there, savoring the peaceful quiet. The events of the previous night still lingered in her mind, but the weight of her nerves had lightened. Luke's family had welcomed her with open arms, and though it was still all so new, she felt a strange sense of belonging. Luke was already up, his side of the bed empty but still warm. She could hear him outside, talking softly with his father. She rose and peeked out the window to see him standing near the barn, leaning against the fence, a cup of coffee in hand. He laughed at something Alan said, and for a moment, Emily just watched him, this man who had become such a central part of her life, wondering how she had gotten so lucky. It wasn't just about Luke anymore, it was about this life that came with him. A life she hadn't anticipated but was starting to fall in love with. She quickly dressed and made her way downstairs, where Claire was already bustling in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The scent of fresh bread and coffee filled the air, and Emily's stomach rumbled in response. "Good morning, Emily." Claire greeted her cheerfully as she walked in. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Emily replied with a smile, feeling the warmth of the kitchen wrap around her like a hug. "Come, sit," Claire gestured to the table, where fresh croissants and jam were already laid out. "Luke and Alan are outside, but they'll be in soon." "Do you take your coffee black?" "Yes, that's perfect," Emily said, sitting down and feeling the welcome energy of the home. Claire set the cup in front of her and took a seat herself, her expression softening. "You know, it's been a long time since Luke brought someone home," she said, her voice gentle. "I've never seen him this serious about anyone." Emily smiled, though the weight of Claire's words settled in her chest. She knew Luke cared deeply for her, but hearing it from his mother made it all the more real. It was comforting, but it also added a layer of responsibility. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them. "I care about him a lot," Emily replied, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "But I'm still figuring things out." Claire nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "That's normal. You two come from different worlds. It's not easy to merge them." Emily appreciated Claire's honesty. There was no judgment, just understanding. "Do you think it can work?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with hope. "I think," Claire said, leaning forward, "that if you love him and he loves you, then it can. But it will take time, and there will be moments when it feels like you're both pulling in different directions. Just remember, love doesn't ask you to change who you are, but it does ask you to grow." Before Emily could respond, the door opened, and Luke and Alan walked in, their laughter filling the room. Luke's eyes lit up when he saw her, and he crossed the room to kiss the top of her head before sitting beside her. "Good morning, mon amour," he said softly. Emily smiled up at him, her heart fluttering at the endearment. "Morning." The four of them sat down to breakfast, and the conversation turned to the day ahead. Alan wanted to show Emily the farm, something Luke had insisted on. It was an important part of his life, and he wanted her to see it, to understand the land that had shaped him. After breakfast, Luke led her outside, where the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows over the fields. They walked hand in hand toward the barn, and then further out, where the land stretched as far as the eye could see. The beauty of it took Emily's breath away. It wasn't the same kind of beauty she was used to as an artist, urban landscapes and city streets, but it was raw and natural, the kind that felt eternal. "This is what I wanted to show you," Luke said, his voice soft as they reached a hill overlooking the fields. "This is my world." Emily stood there, feeling the wind against her skin, the sun warm on her face. She could see why Luke was so tied to this place. It was more than just land, it was life. It was history, roots that went deep into the earth. For the first time, she fully understood what it meant to him, and why he was afraid to leave it behind. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice full of awe. Luke looked at her, his gaze intense. I know this isn't the life you imagined for yourself. And I don't expect you to love it the way I do. But I want you to see that it's a part of me. Emily turned to him, her heart full. I do see it, Luke. And I love you. That's enough for me. He smiled, pulling her close, their foreheads touching. I love you too. We'll figure this out together, okay? She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. They were at the beginning of something new, something unknown. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As they stood on that hill, looking out over the vast expanse of Luke's world, Emily realized that she wasn't just visiting anymore. She was beginning to see a future here. Maybe not immediately, maybe not without sacrifices, but the idea of this life, Luke's life, was becoming something she could picture herself in. A life full of love, family, and connection to the land. It was no longer just Luke's journey. It was theirs. The weeks that followed felt like a dream to Emily, one where time seemed to stretch and blur, with each day bringing her closer to Luke and deeper into his world. She spent her days on the farm, learning more about the life he had built, finding joy in the simple rhythms of country living. She found herself painting more than ever, endless fields, the vast sky, the soft rustle of the trees. This place, with its untouched beauty, was inspiring her in ways the city never had. Luke's family embraced her fully, and she grew closer to them with each passing day. Alain would show her the intricacies of the farm, taking her on long walks through the fields and explaining the harvest cycles, while Claire taught her how to bake fresh bread in the mornings, filling the house with the warmth and scent of fresh dough rising. The days were full and rich, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. But in the quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down, Emily would sometimes be overcome with uncertainty. The life she had left behind, the city, her friends, her career, felt distant and disconnected, like something from another world. It was a life that had once defined her, and now, standing on the edge of Luke's world, she wondered if she could ever truly reconcile the two. One evening, after a long day of work on the farm, Luke and Emily sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and orange. Luke had his arm wrapped around her, his presence grounding her, but Emily's thoughts were miles away. "You've been quiet today," Luke said softly, his voice full of concern. Emily sighed, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "I've been thinking," she admitted. "About us. About this life." Luke didn't say anything right away, but she could feel him tense beside her, his fingers gently tracing circles on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "I love it here," she began, her words slow, measured. "I love your family, the farm, the simplicity of it all. But I'm scared, Luke. Scared of losing who I am. My art, my life in the city, those things are a part of me too." Luke's face was thoughtful, his eyes serious as he looked at her. "I don't want you to lose that, Emily. I don't want you to give up anything that makes you who you are." She turned to him, her voice faltering. "But how do I do both? How do I live in both worlds? I feel like if I choose this life, I'm giving up the other. And if I choose the other, I'm giving you up." Luke's gaze softened, and he reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "Emily, you don't have to choose. I've been thinking about this too. I know what this place means to me, but I also know what your art and your life in the city mean to you. And I want you to have that." Emily stared at him, not sure what he was saying. "But how? How do we make this work?" "We'll figure it out," Luke said, his voice full of quiet conviction. "We don't have to live here full time. Maybe we spend some time in the city, where you can keep creating, keep being part of the world you love. And then we come back here, together, when we need the peace, the space. We can have both." The idea hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Emily saw a path forward. It wasn't one or the other. It was both. The city and the farm. Her art and Luke's life. Their love, holding it all together. "You'd do that?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "You'd leave the farm for me?" Luke smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'd do anything for you, Emily. This place, my family, they're important, but nothing is more important than you." Her heart swelled at his words, and suddenly, the weight of her fears began to lift. They didn't have to give up anything. They just had to be willing to bend, to find the spaces where their worlds overlapped. She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. The sunset deepened, the sky darkening as the stars began to twinkle above. In that moment, Emily knew that their love would be enough to bridge the distance between their two worlds. It wouldn't be easy, there would be challenges, moments of doubt, but together, they could navigate it all. The following days were filled with quiet conversations, plans whispered in the early morning light, and promises made under the stars. They talked about finding a small place in the city where Emily could continue her work, where Luke could visit when the farm allowed. And they talked about the future, what it would look like, how they would build it together. One afternoon, as they sat by the river, Luke handed her a small, velvet box. Her heart raced as she opened it to find a simple gold ring inside, delicate and beautiful. "Emily," Luke said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I don't have all the answers, and I don't know what the future will look like. But I do know that I want to spend it with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the man in front of her, the man who had given her his heart and was now offering her his life. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Luke, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they sat there, holding each other by the river, the future stretching out before them like the endless horizon. It wasn't going to be perfect, but it was going to be theirs. And as the sun set on that day, just as it had so many times before, Emily knew that no matter where life took them, whether to the city streets or the open fields, they would always find their way back to each other. Their journey, together, was just beginning. The wedding day dawned softly, with the first rays of sunlight spilling over the fields, casting a golden glow over Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. Emily awoke to the familiar, peaceful sounds of the farmhouse, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside the window, and the soft murmurs of Luke's family bustling about, preparing for the celebration. Today was the day. Emily lay still for a moment, letting the reality sink in. She was marrying Luke, the man who had woven his life into hers so seamlessly, the man who had shown her a love so true it had changed the way she saw the world, and herself. And today, under the wide blue sky of the farm, surrounded by the people who had become like family to her, they would make it official. Her heart raced with excitement as she slipped out of bed and made her way to the window. Outside, the farm looked magical. Claire, Luke's mother, had insisted on a simple, rustic wedding, true to the spirit of the land, and it was perfect. Wooden benches had been set up in a field overlooking the river, where the ceremony would take place. Flowers bloomed everywhere, wild and untamed, as if nature itself was celebrating their union. "Are you ready for today?" Claire's voice called softly from the doorway. Emily turned, smiling. "I think so. Maybe a little nervous." Claire stepped into the room, her eyes warm with affection. She had been a constant source of support for Emily in the months leading up to the wedding, and her presence had become as comforting as the landscape around them. "You'll be perfect," Claire assured her, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "And Luke, well, he's been waiting for this day since the moment he met you." Emily blushed at the thought, her heart swelling with love for Luke. "I still can't believe all of this," she said softly. "It feels like a dream." Claire chuckled. "The best dreams are the ones that come true." The hours leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur. Emily was surrounded by laughter, warm embraces, and the gentle hum of excitement. Her friends from the city had traveled to be there, blending easily with Luke's family, as though the two parts of her life had always belonged together. When it was finally time to put on her dress, a sense of calm washed over her. The dress was simple, just as she had wanted, ivory lace that flowed gracefully down her frame, with delicate floral embroidery that mirrored the wildflowers in the fields. As she stood in front of the mirror, taking in the reflection, she felt like a part of the landscape itself, a small piece of this vast and beautiful world. There was a soft knock on the door, and Luke's sister, Marie, peeked in with a grin. "They're ready for you," she said, her eyes sparkling. Emily's stomach fluttered with anticipation, but there was no fear. Only love. She followed Marie outside, where the warmth of the afternoon sun greeted her, and the soft rustle of the wind whispered through the trees. The guests were already seated, their faces turned toward her, and at the end of the aisle, there was Luke. Her breath caught when she saw him. He stood tall, his dark hair tousled by the breeze, his eyes fixed on her with a tenderness that made her heart skip. He wore a simple suit, nothing fancy, but he looked perfect to her, like the man she had always dreamed of but never believed she'd find. As Emily began her walk down the aisle, every step brought her closer to him, to the future they had promised each other. She could see the love in his eyes, the quiet determination that had always reassured her, no matter how uncertain the path ahead might have seemed. The ceremony was brief, intimate, and filled with emotion. The officiant, a longtime friend of Luke's family, spoke of love as a journey, one that requires patience, compromise, and above all, trust. Emily held Luke's hands in hers, feeling the strength and warmth in his grip, and when it was time to exchange vows, she couldn't stop the tears from welling in her eyes. "Emily," Luke began, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "from the moment I met you, I knew you were the one I had been waiting for. You brought light into my life in a way I never expected. You saw me for who I am, and you loved me anyway. Today, I promise to love you the same way, to see you, to support you, and to stand by you, no matter what comes our way. I choose you, Emily, every day, for the rest of my life." Emily blinked back tears as Luke slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath, her voice soft but clear. "Luke," she began, her heart full, "you have shown me a kind of love I never knew was possible. You have given me a home, not just in this place, but in your heart. You have been my strength, my partner, and my greatest love. Today, I promise to choose you, every day, in every way. I promise to love you through the seasons of life, through the hard times and the beautiful ones. You are my home, and I am so grateful to spend my life with you." Luke's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, they didn't hesitate. Luke pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like the culmination of everything they had been through together, a kiss filled with love, hope, and the promise of forever. The reception that followed was a joyous blur of music, laughter, and celebration. They danced under the open sky, their guests cheering them on as they spun in circles, the world around them fading into a backdrop of happiness. Emily's heart felt like it would burst with the overwhelming love she felt for Luke, for this life they were building together, for the future that stretched out before them. As the night wore on and the stars began to appear, Luke took Emily's hand and led her away from the crowd. They walked down to the river, where the water flowed quietly in the moonlight, the reflection of the stars twinkling on its surface. Luke pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist as they stood in the stillness of the night. "Can you believe it?" he whispered against her hair. Emily smiled, leaning into him. "It feels like a dream." He kissed the top of her head, his voice low and full of emotion. "It's our dream now. And it's only just beginning." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, with the river flowing gently beside them and the stars shining above. In that moment, everything felt right. The world was vast and full of possibilities, but as long as they were together, they knew they could face whatever came their way. Their journey had led them here, to this perfect moment, where love was not just a feeling but a promise. A promise to keep choosing each other, every day, for the rest of their lives. And so, beneath the star-filled sky, they began their forever. Years passed, but the memory of their wedding day never faded for Emily and Luke. It became a treasured story they'd revisit on quiet evenings, as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the fields of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. Life had unfolded just as they had hoped, messy, beautiful, and full of surprises, but through it all, they had each other. Their decision to split their time between the city and the farm had been a perfect balance. In the city, Emily thrived, her art growing in ways she had never imagined. Her paintings of the rural landscapes around the farm became her most celebrated works, each brushstroke imbued with the love she had found with Luke. Gallery after gallery displayed her work, and with each new success, she knew she was building something that was entirely her own. Yet, no matter how busy life became, no matter how many exhibits or shows demanded her attention, the pull of the farm always remained strong. And Luke, true to his promise, made space for both of their lives. When they were in the city, he found his own rhythm. He helped build a small community garden near their apartment, where he could still keep his hands in the soil, and he loved every visit from Alan and Claire, who often came to spend weekends with them. But his heart, much like Emily's, always longed for the wide-open spaces of the farm, where life moved slower, and they could breathe deeply. On those long drives between the city and the farm, they'd often talk about the future, the kind of life they wanted to build together, the things they'd learned from each other. They laughed often, teased each other about who would win the next argument, but the truth was they rarely argued. The hard moments, the ones they had feared might come, had been met with patience and understanding. They had chosen each other, again and again. One summer evening, after they'd been married for nearly 5 years, they were sitting on the porch together, the air warm with the promise of another peaceful night. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in a dusky glow, when Luke leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked softly, his gaze far away. Emily smiled, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his arm. "I think about it all the time," she replied. "I wonder how we'll keep finding new ways to love this life." Luke chuckled softly. "We always do, don't we?" She turned to him, sensing something deeper in his words. "What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, glancing down at the ground before meeting her eyes. "I've been thinking about our family. About growing it." Emily's heart skipped a beat. They had talked about children in those early days, the possibility of starting a family, but their lives had been so full, so intertwined with building their careers, their relationship, and their balance between two worlds, that it had always felt like something for the future. But now, sitting there with Luke, the idea felt different. It felt real. "I think I'm ready for that," she said, her voice soft but steady. Luke's eyes lit up with the kind of joy she had only seen a handful of times. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You are." She nodded, her heart swelling with love. "I am. I've always wanted that with you, Luke." They sat in the stillness, the weight of the moment settling over them. It wasn't just a decision, it was a new chapter in their journey. A new kind of love they were about to discover together. Months later, when Emily told Luke she was pregnant, they stood in the same spot on the porch, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they held each other, their excitement uncontainable. Life had already given them so much, but this was the beginning of something even more extraordinary. Their son, Julian, was born one crisp autumn day on the farm, under the same clear sky that had witnessed their vows. He came into the world surrounded by the love of his parents, the love of the land, and the family that had always been their foundation. From the very beginning, Julian was a perfect blend of the two of them, Luke's quiet strength and Emily's creative spirit. In the years that followed, their life only grew richer. They welcomed a second child, a daughter named Eloise, whose curiosity about the world reminded Emily of her younger self. The children learned to run barefoot through the fields, to appreciate the beauty of both the city and the countryside, just as their parents had. They grew up knowing the stories of how their mother and father had met, of how love had guided them through every decision. Emily and Luke never stopped making time for the two of them, even as their family grew. They still found moments of quiet together, sitting by the river or walking through the fields, holding hands as they watched the seasons change around them. Their love had deepened with each passing year, becoming something even more profound, something that felt as natural and enduring as the land itself. One evening, many years later, after the children had grown and the farm had passed to the next generation, Luke and Emily found themselves sitting on that same porch, watching another sunset. The air was warm and familiar, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink. They sat in silence for a long time, the comfort of their shared history wrapping around them like a blanket. Luke reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" Emily smiled, her heart full. "The best." As the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear, they stayed there together, two hearts that had traveled so far but had always known the way home. Their journey had been full of love, laughter, and everything in between, but more than anything, it had been theirs. And as they sat there, their hands still entwined, they knew that no matter where the road had taken them, they had always been exactly where they were meant to be, together. The journey of hearts, after all, never truly ends.